We all good?
Should be good. Take it away.
Well, thank you guys for having me. And I can't promise that'll be as interesting as explaining how fly rods are made, and I don't have free giveaways. So on that high note, I'm just going to set expectations low and we'll go from there. I'm Scott Griebling. I'm with the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District. We're up in Longmont, and I'm here to talk to you about our stream management plan. Full disclosure, I just joined the district last March, so I was not around when the stream management plan was put together. I have talked extensively with Sean Cronin, our executive director, and a few others. But Barb, I believe you were around, so feel free to correct anything that I say if I misstate anything. And everyone else, please jump in with questions or interruptions, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to do kind of an introduction on the basin, and then we'll jump into kind of the process of the stream management plan and what it actually developed. And then I'm going to end talking about the implementation of our plan and the projects that we're working on now. So who am I? I grew up outside of Golden, Colorado, and was backpacking and fishing, rafting, and all of that all through Colorado in the West. I went to CU for undergrad, got a degree in water resource engineering, moved out to the Northwest, did some river restoration work, mostly focused on salmon out there, on big river systems. And I spent some time internationally doing some kind of volunteer water sanitation work, and ended back at CU for a master's degree and have been here since. I spent the bulk of the last 8.5 years on the Platte River Basin for working with the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. This is a far more bearded version of myself out on the Platte River in Nebraska. We were looking at endangered species compliance throughout the Platte River Basin. And I'm excited to be talking to you guys. I'm really excited to be working for the district. It's nice to be doing work in what's more or less my backyard. I live down in Lafayette. So what about the basin? St. Vrain Basin is just north of you guys. So this is a view of the basin, kind of an aerial view looking to the west. So you can see Longmont there, Lyons, and then the mountains rising up and into Allen's Park and Long's Peak. So the St. Vrain starts at the base of Long's Peak and goes all the way out to the confluence with the Platte River, the South Platte River, just outside of Platterville. Similar to Boulder Creek, South Boulder Creek, we've got several very distinct, what we're calling eco-regional zones. So, high mountain, alpine, and subalpine zones, and that goes into the canyons and the foothills with lots of trees and forests. Then there's this transition zone coming out of the canyons and the foothills, and eventually that leads into the plains. Some stats there on kind of the elevation ranges, as well as the general makeup of the watershed for you guys. Here's a quick shot of the various subbasins of the watershed. You'll note that there's the North St. Vrain Creek, the Middle St. Vrain Creek, the South St. Vrain Creek, and then Left Hand Creek are kind of the main branches of the St. Vrain drainage. So with that, why do we manage watersheds? And I'm using the word watersheds purposefully there, and as opposed to streams. And I'll kind of circle back to this, but I really do think taking a watershed approach I think that's where a lot of the potential is, a lot of the collaboration is, and streams, taking a limited view of streams, as I'm sure you guys all agree, really excludes a lot of the key functions of a watershed and the key drivers that impact streams. So why do we manage watersheds? You guys can probably come up with as many reasons as I can, but they're incredibly important. They are our lifeline on so many levels. So for our cities, city water, agriculture water, for recreation, for the environment. And there's no one entity that owns the watershed and is doing a comprehensive approach to managing it. And so it's a piecemeal. Every different entity has its own little piece of it, its own little focus of it. And it really does take a group effort to manage and, thoughtfully manage how the watershed can impact all of us and how we can work towards benefiting all of our different uses throughout the watershed. So then, why do we follows into, okay, so if we agree that we want to manage watersheds, then the next question is how. You guys have clearly answered these questions for yourselves with your stream management plans. And stream management plans really are a great tool for managing watersheds and for bringing diverse stakeholders together to address the needs in a given system. This idea of watershed management is not new to the water plan or to the last 5-10 years, but the Colorado Water Plan really did highlight the need for them. And that's kind of where our watershed management plan grew out of. And before that, really what laid the groundwork for our watershed management or for the stream management plan was the 2013 flood. And that, as you guys know, devastated our whole area. And our executive director, Sean Cronin, likes to talk about this time before the floods hit. Everybody in our basin was kind of doing their own thing. There wasn't a lot of collaboration going on. And he says that he likes to say there's 3 things that really drive collaboration. And one of them is a common enemy. One of them is, pre-2013, our basin didn't really have a common enemy. There wasn't some external force that was coming in to steal up our water. There wasn't a big onerous federal permitting process or something like that that was really constraining water uses. Another thing that drives collaboration is a lack of resources. If we don't have enough resources to achieve our goals, we have to work together to achieve those goals. But again, before the flood, our area had enough. Each entity had its its own little piece of the pie, and it was able to do what it needed to do within that, and didn't really need to work across borders or in a collaborative fashion to achieve its goals. Then the final thing that really drives collaboration is a disaster or an emergency, and the flood very much changed the way that everybody in the basin worked together. It totally broke down barriers and built very strong relationships. And out of those relationships, after the flood recovery had happened, the stakeholders in the basin were wondering, okay, what's next? What are we looking to in the future? And we brought this question to everyone, and we said, we've been focused on flood recovery, and now we've kind of gotten that behind us. So what's next? How can we move beyond that? And do we want a stream management plan? So in a facilitated meeting, everyone got together and said, hey, do we want a stream management plan? And if we do, who's going to lead it? And the answer to the first question was yes, we do want a stream management plan. And the answer to the second question was the district, the St. Vrain Left-Hand Water Conservancy District had played a leading role in the flood recovery and a kind of key connecting role with all of those different stakeholders. And so everyone said, yeah, go for it. And the process was born. And so who were some of those people involved? This is a list of everyone. I think it's everyone. I might be missing a few, but you'll note Trout Unlimited. So the St. Vrain chapter, the St. Vrain Anglers chapter of Trout Unlimited was involved, along with a whole slew of other people, some key players in the basin. And having so many people at the table, really, so many different perspectives and so many different entities at the table really allowed for a very robust process and a very thoroughly developed plan, I would say. So here is the stated goal of the process. And I highlighting there that it really was this transition from flood recovery to looking at how can we build on that to bring about stream health and improve the environmental conditions and also improve while making sure that we're meeting everyone's uses, their needs, current and future needs, and all of that happening, respecting private property rights and the prior appropriation system. There were several goals or objectives rather, that followed from that goal. So looking at developing management options and water availability, again, focusing on all users. Wanted to gather all of the information that did exist and characterize it and help it inform what future infrastructure needs were, what the future of water looked like in the basin. Also using that and gaining additional information to assess river functional health. And then compile all of this into some recommendations for what's next. A few things to note: the stream management plan is basin-wide. So I think this is a unique characteristic of our stream management plan compared to others that focus on individual reaches. Ours really does cover the whole basin from the headwaters to the confluence with the South Platte. So wide geographical area, wide, a variety of uses, a variety of competing needs throughout that. Here's a quick summary of the funding, and bulk of that came through a CWCB grant, but there was many other entities that kicked in money towards the process. So once we got the plan together, we scoped it out, we got the funds for it, hired a consultant team, and that was led by Biohabitats with support from the others shown here. And this kind of outlines the process starting in the fall of 2018 and ending in fall of 2020. And I'm going through this quickly. I'm imagining you guys are relatively familiar with stream management plans and some of this process. Feel free to stop me and ask questions if I'm going too quickly, but I will continue kind of at a fast pace otherwise. So like I mentioned, our stream management plan addressed the entire watershed. So with that came a really big scope, a big possible scope. There was all kinds of different areas that we could focus on, and we had a limited amount of available funds. So how do you balance those two things? And how do you involve the public? What is the right level of involvement? Soliciting public ideas and thoughts and wanting them to be involved in the process, but also not being able to take a lot of the public input and turn it into meaningful actionable items within the plan. So kind of taking a hybrid approach there. We're wanting to solicit public thought, but also needing the engaged stakeholders to be really driving the process. The process, throughout the process, there were these 4 themes that were highlighted. So flow, habitat, water quality, and water management. And I'm going to go through each of those and talk about and go a little more in depth on the aspects of each, starting with flow. And here are a whole bunch of gauges throughout the basin. The kind of checkered circles there are actual gauges, and then the white circles are nodes that were used in modeling for some of the hydrology to determine what the flow needs were in our basin. It's kind of a characterization of the annual hydrograph for different year types. So winter flows, spring flows, or winter flows, or sorry, wet years are in the blue, average years are in the green, and dry years are in the red, and kind of highlighting how the river behaves at different times of the year and what the important ecological function of each of those aspects of the hydrograph are. That help to drive focus on, where do we need to look at improving flow, where are flow conditions good, and where are they in really dire straits in a few spots. This is another way of kind of looking at the flows with August, September, and January monthly median flows and a 7-day minimum flow. So you can see different gauges from the upper part of the watershed all the way down to the confluence, having different flows at different times of year, different flow needs at various parts of the watershed. Another way of looking at that was using some modeling tools to identify what natural flows might be on a monthly basis and comparing that again with those wet, average, and dry years. You can see in the average and dry years, they're well below what's approximated as a natural flow during most periods. Here's a map of some dry up points kind of in between Lyons and Longmont. So these are average numbers. Sorry, the graph doesn't state this, but it's average annual days of dry up. And so you can see there's kind of helped guide the assessment to say, yeah, this stretch here just downstream of Lyons is a real problem spot. There's several head gates that divert from right in that area and sweep the river. All of that information was compiled to develop like this map and some other maps that show where are the flow risks, the ecological risks based on flows. And it really does highlight that Lyons to Longmont corridor as a key area to focus on. There's also a spot on the South St. Vrain up near left-hand, the Left-Hand Creek. Actually, there's a diversion from South Boulder Creek into Left-Hand Creek right at that spot. That takes a lot of the water too. So that's another area to focus on. So that was kind of a quick run through of the flow stuff. And what about habitats? So here's, there's a lot of different types of habitat. There's a lot of different aspects to habitat. And the stream management plan tried to tackle a variety of these. Some of the conservation targets in the basin are shown here. Things to focus on, things to really highlight as important ecological function, that have important ecological function. And then similar conservation targets focusing on the upper watershed and the various sub-ecological regions of the upper watershed, as well as the lower watershed. And that transition zone there, so that second bullet, the small native fish are species of concern. That is that red area that was on the flow map that stretched between Lyons and Longmont. So some real concern for the native fish species there. Another aspect of habitat is wildfire. And this is a map of wildland fire potential. And you can see, especially that that zone, that the canyons area it's all ready to burn. It's pretty scary when you look at it like this. And also habitat, part of the habitat assessment was looking at fish passage barriers. And this is an example of a potential of a passage barrier, especially for those native species of concern. Small fish can't jump and they're not the strongest of swimmers. So this type of waterfall situation is pretty much impassable to them. Here's a map showing the spatial distribution of passage barriers throughout the basin, with reds being total barriers and blues being partial barriers. Shifting over to water quality. So one key water quality aspect are heavy metals, and there was a lot of mining that happened along Left-Hand Creek. And there's the consequence of that is impaired stream systems, lots of metals on that side, and thankfully not too much on the St. Vrain side though. You can see a map of just, there were mines all over that area. One of the issues that the St. Vrain Creek does have, though, is with agriculture in that transition zone and out on the plains having higher E. coli and higher nitrate concentrations. And that the final theme that the stream management plan focused on is water management. So here's a map of all of the agriculture, the irrigated lands in our area. So how do you balance that with growing cities, growing municipal demand? So here's City of Longmont's water supply map as well. And how do you balance that with recreational needs? And recreational, is a huge part and it's being developed. So the Resilient St. Vrain project is drawing tons and tons of people to the river, to the street, to the creek. And as you guys know, there's some great fishing spots along the St. Vrain as well. Some good boating. So lots of competing needs and ecological needs. So here's a quick picture of the in-stream flow reaches and wanting to make sure that there's flow in the creek, but also wanting to make sure that agriculture producers can continue growing crops and producing food for our area. Also wanting people who live in Longmont to be able to turn on their taps and get water. The stream management plan, as far as the water management aspect went, it had some good ideas and it kind of stated the problem, but the solutions really are left to us. So we'll get into that. One of the things the plan did, excuse me, was identify desired conditions for each of those 4 themes. So for flow, with everything that with all the data that it looked at and with the modeling, and all of the stakeholder engagement, came up with this desired condition to achieve a flow regime that satisfies the needs of the natural environment, consumptive use, non-consumptive users, and consumptive users. And it also went on to state some specific goals and some specific projects to help achieve that. I won't read through all of this, but similar desired conditions for habitat. So wanting, resilient habitats, and this idea of the network of riparian corridors and channels and in-stream habitat, as well as floodplains. For water quality, we want to meet public health standards and environmental standards set for environmental concerns as well. And for water management, so to achieve that balance of, there needs to be a space between natural environments, non-consumptive and consumptive users. So that's a fairly quick overview of the stream management plan, what it did, some of the key things that it looked into, and some of the results from it. So with all of that, that was finalized in 2020, fall of 2020. Middle of COVID. Where have we gone from here? Where do we go from here, and where have we gone from here? Is kind of the big question. And really, this is where I get excited, because this is the work that I'm get to focus on a daily basis. One of the key things to start with is continuing to build on that collaboration, continuing to have multiple people, multiple stakeholders at the table on all these projects, continuing to involve the city, the county, environmental groups like Trout Unlimited and others, getting ag involved as well, keeping everyone involved in the conversation to help ensure that the solutions that we are working towards, the project that we are working towards, have broad-based support. And there's really been an appetite for that. It's been really neat to see. I'll go into a little more detail about some of the projects, but fish passage, there's been a ongoing effort to rethink our approach to fish passage in the basin, and a couple other things too. Another really cool thing that we are right in the middle of is using adaptive management to really implement this stream management plan, this watershed management plan. This is being largely developed and driven by the Left Hand Watershed Center, who are doing incredible work. And we are partnering with them. And there's a lot of great overlap between our two organizations, between the district and the Watershed Center. Just with our various skill sets and perspectives, we've been able to work, to build a very collaborative relationship there. I'm really excited about the work that the adaptive management group is doing. Excuse me. And this, if you're not familiar with adaptive management, it can be a buzzword and it can mean a lot of different things. So I think it's important to define it well. But essentially, it's a scientific approach to aid with decision making. So the goal is to say, we have this watershed and we want to manage it well on a lot of different levels. So how are we going to do that? And we go through this process of saying, okay, here's what we would like it to look like. So that's part of develop the model, designing and implementing projects or other, other approaches to help achieve the model or the stated desired condition that we want. You monitor the impact of that, you evaluate how well it's doing, and then you adjust. This is a great tool to face uncertainty, and there is a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what the absolute best solution is. We've got a lot of good ideas, but you need to do a little bit of trial and error, and adaptive management is a great framework to do that in a very structured manner. A little bit more about that process. I'm not going to read all of this. This is available on the Left Hand Watershed Center's website. Another part of the implementation that I've kind of touched on is that shift from stream management to watershed management. So really broadening our view from beyond just the stream to recognize that this is a whole watershed system. So floodplains are critical, forest health is critical. Also, we, especially in that, the lower stretches of the watershed, it is a highly developed system. So it is a combined stream, ditch, irrigation system. And that's just a reality of life. So how do we manage all of that in a way that benefits the stream as well as all of the other users in there? And then another key aspect of all of this is funding. And the district in 2020 went to the voters and asked with the 7A ballot initiative and asked them to increase our mill levy to upwards over $3 million annually to support a lot of the things that were called out in the stream management plan. And the stream management plan was really a key aspect of this because it supported all of these, it identified the need across a number of levels, and we were able to take that need and work on how to best communicate it to the public. And it turns out the voters overwhelmingly supported this, supported water and ecosystem health, which was really cool to see. So now we have a plan to move forward and we have funds to move forward. It's an exciting place that we're in right now. So what are the projects that we are looking at doing? What are we working on right now? So one of the projects that is just about to start is to develop a flow target working group. We've been doing a lot of thought internally on how to best approach this, but flow targets really are one of the key things to be able to identify what flows you want, where, and when. That allows you to any habitat design that you do around that. It supports that. If you're talking about watershed management with, bringing water or re-releasing, restructuring the way that maybe, for example, the city of Longmont does some of its water releases. Being able to say specifically, we're going to get the most value, or we want to focus on these priorities. So this is just an example hydrograph, but if there's a certain species of concern, or if there's a certain time period of concern, being able to say, okay, this is the flow regime that we would like to see in the river, and then how do we go about achieving that? This really supports a lot of the other work that we're doing at the moment. So stream gauges support the flow targets. So increasing the spatial density of our stream gauges, so that we can get good, accurate measurements, especially with the number of diversions that we have. There's a lot of spots where between one point in the river, one stream gauge in the river, and the next, there's a whole bunch of water that comes out and there's a whole bunch of water that goes in, and it's really hard to track that. So increasing the number of stream gauges will help us know, okay, where are the dry up points? Where are the points of greatest need, and where are things doing better than we think? Fish passage is another key thing. Like I mentioned, there's been good collaborative effort around not just how do we get fish passage projects on the ground, but really how do we rethink our approach to fish passage. Traditionally, a lot of times there have been outside entities who say, we really care about fish passage, so let's go get funds, grant funding and whatnot, to implement these projects. And so they get the funding, and then they come to the ditch, the head gates, owners of the head gates, and they say, hey, we have all this money and we want to do this project, and will you do it? And the ditch companies are kind of backed into it, and they obviously they like the idea of improving their infrastructure, but they aren't they didn't have a seat at the table, or oftentimes don't have a direct seat at the table in the planning and the design aspect of fish passage projects. So we're trying to flip that on its head, where rather than going out and getting the funds and going to the ditch company and saying, can we do this? We go to the ditch company first and say, hey, we have money that's available. Would you be open to redesigning your structure, and not even calling it fish passage? Fish passage is one of the key aspects, but sediment passage is another very important function of these head gates. If you can design a head gate to pass more sediment, that minimizes the canal and the ditch company's maintenance load. So if they don't have to get a heavy equipment in to dredge out their ditches every season, then that's a huge cost savings for them, and it's a real benefit. So looking at ways that headgate infrastructure replacement for passage, for fish passage, for water passage, for sediment passage, and also possibly boating as well. So trying to work with ditch companies on the front end, and having them pick their own engineers and do the design themselves. Certainly being a part of being able to comment on the design, ensure the design does have the passage benefits for fish and other species in the process. But really, really hopeful that this will bring about some long-term sustainable projects that also consider the maintenance aspect too, which can be maintenance and operations. There's several fish passage projects in our basin that are 5-10 years old that were great for the time, but as they've been operated, maintenance issues come up, and the question of how is this really achieving how it was designed, or could we be operating it better to allow for better passage are huge questions that the actual operators weren't involved with, and so a lot of times they just get pushed to the side and discarded. Another fun project that we're looking at is the Colorado Airborne Snow Observatory. This is a statewide effort that uses LiDAR from planes. So they fly planes over the watershed, and it all goes to measuring snow, looking at better, trying to develop better forecasts for snowpack. And what it does is you start with a given land surface elevation, and then the LiDAR bounces off the snow. And so you take the difference of those two, and you can know on a much more spatially refined area, much more spatially refined over an area, what the snowpack is. And it really is, we're hoping that this will be a game changer in the accuracy of our snow forecasts, both in terms of timing and quantity. And this will help with that water management aspect. So having better data, having the stream gauges to track that, and also having the flow targets will help us know, okay, how can we manage the system more effectively? Another aspect of all of that is mapping, and so identifying what work is happening where and how to communicate that to the public. Don't have a ton to say on that. This is still something that we're working on, but also it's not just mapping, it's looking at story maps. How do we tell the story of the basin and what the needs are of the basin, and really capture all the good work that's going on, and also the work that needs to be done moving forward. So water quality, looking at acid mine, and heavy metal issues throughout the basin, but primarily in Left Hand Creek. Trout Unlimited is actually working with the Ballarat Educational Center on a project up there, and we're hoping to be able to support that in some way as well. The Watershed Center is working on a bunch of different projects, so a lot of good work in the water quality area. Habitats, here's a couple examples of projects that Boulder County is working on in that stretch between Lyons and Longmont, where they are working on a combined kind of fish passage and habitat improvement, focused in large part on the native fish, on those small little guys. In forest health, this is there's such cool work going on right now with the St. Vrain Forest Health Partnership. It's a massively collaborative effort with entities across the basin at all levels. It's being led by the Watershed Center, but it's got participation from the Federal Forest Service, the State Forest Service, Boulder County, City of Boulder. The district is involved. The Boulder Valley Longmont Soil Conservancy District is also involved. There's probably a lot of the local towns and municipalities are involved, but it's a really cool effort, and it's tackling that huge problem. If you remember several slides back to that map of wildfire potential, and basically the whole middle half of the basin could potentially burn, and burn severely. And we saw with the Cowwood fire and then all of the other devastating fires, especially in 2022 or 2020, getting more accustomed to this idea of mega fires. And a huge reason that those mega fires happen are, I'll walk through a series of graphics here that the Watershed Center and that St. Vrain Forest Health Collaborative or partnership rather has developed. It's compelling information for the public to help communicate how forests can be managed and why to manage them in that fashion. Upwards of 70 to 90% of the trees that are in many locations that are growing today did not used to be there. Basically did not use the forest density the forests have become far more dense in large part because of fire suppression over the past 100 years. So forest fires used to, small low severity fires used to burn pretty regularly, and what they would serve to do is clear out a lot of the small trees and leave bigger trees untouched. what's happened is the forests have grown so dense that there's such a large amount of fuel that when a fire does start, like in the background in this picture, what happens is this massive, incredibly destructive mega fire that just burns the entire forest, not just the the understory, but the canopy as well. And so what they're working towards is, how do we allow for a large degree of clearing? So that's one of the big things that needs to happen, is to clearing out large sections of the watershed. And how do we also move towards using fire as mitigation? So controlled burns, as people helping everyone in the watershed to be comfortable with that idea, and helping landowners be comfortable with the idea of a much more sparse forest, as well as recreational users. And this really is what a healthy forest looks like. This is what a healthy forest traditionally looked like, and this is what we want to get back to. And then also, how do we fund that? So it's a huge question, and there's state monies, there are federal monies that are being allocated towards this effort. And I'm really excited because the Forest Health Partnership has done a lot of the groundwork to be out in front of those funds, so that as soon as they are available, we can say, we have identified these key areas within the watershed that need protection, that protect properties, that protect water infrastructure. So Button Rock Reservoir is one of the big reservoirs that is owned by the city of Longmont. That's off the North St. Vrain, or South St. Vrain, sorry. And it's a key water infrastructure for the city of Longmont. If the watershed around that were to burn, it would be the water quality and the ability to provide clean water to the city would be severely impacted. Moving on from the forest health to in-stream flows. This is, I'm showing it on the top map, the existing in-stream flows in the basin, and on that bottom map again, the areas of ecological risk. And you can see there's unfortunately not a lot of overlap. The purple lines up with the areas that don't have a high amount of ecological risk, and that those red areas do not have any current in-stream flows. There's been a lot of really exciting work with in-stream flows on the state level, looking at creative mechanisms to provide in-stream flows that give a little bit more flexibility. So looking at short-term leases, looking at using augmentation for in-stream flows. And we're really excited about the possibilities there. And we are kind of continuously looking at different options and different ways to bring about more in-stream flows in the basin. Another project that is kind of one of the district's main focus is this idea of creek improvement facilities. As you all know, the idea of storage, when you talk about water and you talk about building new storage, it's oftentimes a deal breaker, and there's not a lot of traction for talking about putting new storage in a system. But to achieve a lot of the things that we want to, like those in-stream flows and some of the flexibility with the water management, oftentimes storage is one of the key aspects of it. So we, Sean Cronin specifically came up with this term, creek improvement facilities, recognizing that, well, how can we go about developing facilities that are benefiting the creek directly? And yes, they do store water, or some of them might store water in various ways, but really the point of them is not storage for storage sake. They'll be off channel, so we're not talking about any big on channel reservoirs or anything like that, but looking at how do we develop existing and other potential storage sites, reservoir sites, and wetland sites that have multi-benefits that in the facility itself. So how can you develop storage with habitat benefits? Can you do shallow, more in example, using the example of a gravel pit, if you mine out a gravel pit, rather than just filling it with water and having it be a bathtub, can you design it so that you have some shallow areas with a large degree of wetlands, or can you operate in a way that it functions for groundwater recharge? So really trying to rethink the opportunities out there to be able to start connecting a number of different smaller sites and maybe some larger opportunities to bring about to be able to provide the water that's needed for those in-stream flows. So these facilities, during periods of high flow, you could put water in these facilities, and then during periods of low flows, you could release it back to the stream. We are we're a couple years into kind of a feasibility approach, looking at what's possible with these and identifying some good options. And again, looking at big options, looking at small options, looking at what are more traditional storage facilities, and also looking at alternative methods. And I guess I've been about 45 minutes. Thank you guys for all of your attention through all of this. I really appreciate it. But a few things to note at the end is really taking that watershed approach again. It's so critical to being able to effectively manage the whole system. Adaptive management is such a great strategy that you can use to help you face uncertainty and to add a lot of scientific rigor to support whatever aspects of implementation you might try. Partnerships and collaboration are so key to the whole process. And funding, local funding. I think one of the really cool aspects of that 7A ballot initiative is it's local funding going to local projects. And I think there's a lot of appetite for that. So finding local funding mechanisms can be really powerful. Again, thank you guys. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
I'll start with a big thank you for the overview, Scott. And, as our group has gone through the South Boulder Creek Stream Management Plan, we can certainly appreciate the efforts of your group in the watershed just north of us.
And I will say I'm really impressed that you guys are leading that effort, because it's a huge effort, and kudos to you guys for taking that on.
I will take little to no credit. There's a number of folks, Stephen and Gary and Peter and others who are very integral, but there's a lot of good stuff going on. And it's interesting, we just brought this, I was just talking to Stephen about this, because we're hearing from other organizations in the watershed about additional projects and other reaches of either the main stem or the south stem of Boulder Creek, and what's needed there. And so the question that we're kind of facing now is, do we continue with just the stream management plan on South Boulder Creek, or open it up into more of a watershed plan? And what does that look like, and how do we manage it? It's such a monumental amount of work. It truly is a full-time job just for South Boulder Creek. So to look at the whole watershed, I think it makes sense to keep it with one entity. Obviously, we have some amazing partners. Left Hand Watershed is one. The others, Trout Unlimited chapters across the state, but specifically in the Northeast region and CTU. But yeah, it's a ton of work. I will throw a question your way. Biggest challenge? Because I know we've faced a ton just on South Boulder Creek, but yeah. I'm curious what your answer would be.
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind for me personally is that there's just so much that we can do, and so making meaningful progress on a number of fronts at one time is a challenge. And it really does take that collaborative effort and having a lot of different people focused on it. I think that we've got that idea of water management and rethinking how we manage water. There will be a lot of challenges. I anticipate. We have to get really creative to work within the existing prior appropriation system to get water in different places than it has traditionally been. And so there's solutions and there's exciting opportunities, but it certainly is a very legitimate challenge. And I think Stephen mentioned at the start of this call with South Border Creek drying up and water, there's not being water in the system to get it where you need it to go. So, yeah.
Interesting. I'll open it up after this, but if you were to hear of an organization going into a stream management or a watershed management plan from the ground up, what would be your, one piece of advice for them?
Dream big and expect it to take, twice as much time as you think it will.
Wait, don't tell Stephen that. Hold on. Don't. You're going to scare him.
But yeah, I really do think it's a very involved process, and rightfully so. There's so many aspects that go into it. I think you guys are probably really smart to do it in reaches and focus on one at a time. I think we bit off a lot with taking the whole watershed on at once. And I think as we look at implementation, it'll be more in a focused reach area in some capacity.
That makes sense. Other questions? I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I do. Scott, thanks for the incredibly detailed and thorough presentation. That was fantastic. I was coming up with questions the whole time, and then 2 slides later, you would answer that question, which is impressive. The only remaining question that I can think of really is, so looking at, we were talking about the healthy forests towards the end, but in light of the Marshall Fire and the way that it devastated through the area, they're looking at the impacts on not just the surface water, but groundwater as well, eventually, with all the toxins. Is that going to either, I guess, promote or require a revision or a refresh or a refocus of efforts to manage the watershed within the Lyons to Longmont and beyond watershed area?
That's a great question, and I don't really have a good answer for it. I think, I live in Lafayette, and I was looking at the smoke coming over, and we packed our bags and we're ready to go if we had to, and it was, that really opened my eyes to the new reality that we live in, and fire being much more than just a forest fire thing, and that our or our open space adjacent communities really are threatened by fire, and with high winds and the right conditions. I think we're just starting to think about the watershed and groundwater impacts of those type of fires. So it's going to be folded into discussions moving forward. And I don't really have a better answer for you than, we're thinking about it and trying to readjust our perspectives in light of it.
Yeah, that's about all I would expect. I mean, we're only 13 days after that fire. And so having a full, thorough answer on that would be really impressive this quickly after. But I'm just curious if that is already been discussed, that we need to look at this in the future and see what the actual impacts were, months down the road.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
I think that's definitely going to be the case. We're just, this week we'll have an adaptive management planning stakeholders meeting. Next week there's a forest health partnership meeting. I think all these issues are going to be starting to come up in some of the stakeholder collaborative groups around the St. Vrain Basin. And when you look at the amount of land in northern Boulder County that is either in Boulder County Longmont open space or Boulder County conservation easements, it ends up being a really big percentage of the land flanking St. Vrain and Left Hand and the eastern Boulder Creek. So I can't see where it wouldn't become part of the conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, Scott, Stephen again. You mentioned, the difference between doing our relatively small 9-mile reach, our crazy little working reach that we're handling versus doing a continental divide to Platte River complete basin. What do you think the advantages of doing the whole thing at once might be?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think having the comprehensive approach so that you are looking at all aspects of the watershed, looking at how the whole system functions, and also being able to look at within the system, what are the priorities? So you can look at relative, is some of the acid mine and the heavy metals pollutants, how does that kind of factor into the basin-wide impacts compared to low flows in a certain area? So, and also I think because we had the whole basin, it really brought a lot of people to the table with that, and a lot of different perspectives. But another example is the forest health. So forest fires don't burn down on the plains, but a fire would dramatically impact water quality in the plains potentially. And to some extent, vice versa. If you have really large water demands lower down in the system, a lot of those are going to be coming from higher up in the system. So the water sources might be impacted up high as well. So it kind of goes both ways.
Thanks.
I had a question. Hi, this is Barb Sheedlow. I'm on the board with St. Vrain chapter. And I'm kind of interested in your thoughts about involving at the grassroots level. And, after we've gone through the planning and now we're at the stage of implementing and trying to find ways to get volunteers that are non-technical or not building, passage gates and things like that. I think the work that has been done with Watershed Days that Left Hand's put on is a great example of kind of introducing the public to the watershed and getting them engaged and actually letting them do volunteer work. And I was kind of interested in your thoughts on that and also how that might apply to what Boulder will be doing.
Yeah, and I think you point out that the Watershed Center are doing great work with that, and they really are providing cool opportunities for people to get their feet wet and contribute. I think the water quality area is a great place to start, and that's really where they're focusing, I think, with a lot of that. It's such a tangible way, you're collecting samples or looking at macroinvertebrates. So you can be doing meaningful work and without a ton of training and whatnot. I think for a lot of the projects that we're moving forward, it's hard to get volunteers to engage in a meaningful way, I guess. But there's a ton of opportunity for outreach and engagement, and even just doing fun things, making videos. We've got a couple of videos that we're working on this year that we're hoping to have at some of the local film festivals and stuff like that, that just highlight different aspects of the district and the basin and the work that we all do. So
I would just encourage the district to continue to think about spending money in that fashion, because that's really how you're investing in the future, for the future generation too, for us. So great.
Yeah, and if you have any thoughts and ideas, please send them our way, because we're it's Sean and me, and we've got an office manager, and then we're looking to hire another technical staff this year.
Yeah.
And we all have ideas on how to do that, but timing is limited, and expertise. I am an engineer, and I am not I can do some public outreach stuff, but it's not my focus. And so, but it's super, super important. So really finding ways to build those partnerships and to leverage relationships and all of that. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to collaborate on that. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, please keep us in mind. And one of the things, with our 7A funds that we can support is if there's some funding needed. So do keep us in mind if, if funding is the limitation of getting volunteers engaged, we would be more, I'm imagining we'd be very happy to come to the table with some funds. So.
I see Barbara has her hand up, but I will just jump in and say, I know we've had a number of opportunities on the South Boulder Creek initiative for, boots on the ground work, and people are always super interested in getting involved in those efforts. I think the hardest part that Scott kind of started to allude to there is just getting the word out at, what we need and when we need it. Because often it is last minute, and it's difficult to organize people and also do all the work for on the engineering side. So
yeah, and that's where I think the Basin partnership with the Left Hand Watershed Center, there is a paid staff that bringing that volunteer component to projects is really important. And so, and that's why our chapter is aligned really closely with them. So that we can work together that way. And, most of these projects today, nobody goes and rolls a rock in the stream and knocks some trees down to enhance the floodplain and that kind of stuff. We don't do that physically anymore. It's all done with machines. So I think, Barb's point about volunteerism is really important for that community connection. It's a fantastic way for people to actually connect to the watershed and start to feel like they're part of it. And so I guess that's just something for all of us in the stakeholder groups to kind of take to heart is, how can we still get people involved, in whether it's seating when when things aren't reaching their 80% fulfillment, and going back and doing small repairs so that you can put small work crews kind of together. I don't know, there's a lot of things that we all put our heads together. Hopefully we can do a better job of it. It's all capacity at the end of the day. Scott, the question I wanted to ask was regarding all those in-stream flow designations on the St. Vrain. I don't remember that map. And so I was kind of surprised when I saw that. Is that mostly paper water?
They're mostly junior. It's a lot of junior rights. Yeah, so
because
they
I'm
don't
thinking
get.
there isn't really a source to once as freestone. All of that part of the river is predominantly freestone. There's like no water to fulfill any additions.
Yeah, that's a great point that those in-stream flows are very junior. So, there's much more senior water rights that pull the water downstream, and
Right.
they have value in that you can't develop water after those
Right.
rights. But that's where the kind of alternative mechanisms really do come into play, and finding ways to use water that's already in the system, some of the senior rights, and move it around or reclassify it or temporarily lease it, using augmentation water. So lots of looking at a variety of mechanisms to get more water in the stream, in addition to those in-stream flow rights. They can actually be wet water.
Right. Yeah. Create it into wet water, convert it into that. The other comment I would make to Brendan's first question about biggest challenges, I think it's still a really big challenge in our basin to just create the opportunities for the agricultural stakeholders and the municipals and other environmental stakeholders to get together and share their perspectives. COVID slowed a lot of things down. And the stream management plan was a great start to bringing communities together. COVID, on the other hand, has slowed a lot of things down, and it's still a challenge just for those communities to come together and talk about their common goals and find solutions that where all those common goals overlap.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Yeah, it's been a lot of bringing different stakeholders together and finding different groups that are, the county, in our instance, the county versus the city, pulling different stream measurements, throughout the year or quarterly or whatever it is, and pulling all that data together and all the right people. And it's I can't even say I've done any of it, but I know for our team it's been a challenge. So it's real.
One thing I'm seeing Michaela Mullins on the call, and I do want to call out the River Network is doing incredible work. They were key drivers of the stream management plan process from the beginning, and they contributed support, and they continue with their peer-to-peer network to really, I'm learning a ton through that process, and they're really offering a lot of great support, not just to get through the stream management plan process, but into implementation. So certainly be using them as a resource.
If we've learned nothing else through these processes, it's that there's a lot of great people in our communities who are doing a lot of awesome things. And when you bring them all together to collaborate, it's I guess the possibilities are endless. So it's really great to see. Any other questions for Scott as we wrap up here, last minute and a half? Alrighty. Scott, I'm sure we could forward on your contact info if anybody had any follow-up questions. But we wanted to thank you again so much for being with us this evening and presenting, and for all your hard work in the Basin, and keep it up. Thanks so much.
Well, yeah, thank you guys, and thanks for all your work, and thanks for paying attention to a virtual presentation. It's never easy at times, especially at night, but I really appreciate your guys' attention, and it's cool to learn a little bit more about the work you're doing. So
you did a great job, Scott, recapping a process that you weren't actually involved in. You've really consolidated it and presented it in a really understandable way. You did a super job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, hope to see you guys again at some point in the future.
Yes, likewise. Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks all.